Yo, what is up, guys? Welcome back to episode number 2 of QTalks, live from the Media Hub on riotradio.ca. This is your host, Contingent Terrade, and this show is all about sharing the secrets to success from everyday millionaires. More specifically, the secrets that are taught by authors in the best business, sales, and self-improvement books. Today we're going to talk about his self-improvement books, which is Atomic Habits by James Clear, Tiny Changes, Remarkable Results. This book talks all about easy and proven ways to build good habits and break bad ones. Guys, just to show you, this book has sold over 15 million copies. That shows how credible the book is and how credible the author is. And so, just to let you guys know how I'm going to be going through this book in this episode, this book is split into 5 different sections. So number 1 is the fundamental section of the book, which is called Fundamentals. And so we talked about the first half of this section in the last episode. Today we're going to be doing the second half of that. And then the next 4 sections are the 4 sciences behind habits. Number 1 is the Q, number 2 is the craving, number 3 is action, and number 4 is the reward. If there is not one of these, there is no habit. Okay, I'll explain what these are, but today we're going to go through the first 2. So the Q for the second segment of this episode, and the craving for the third segment of this episode. So, a little recap to what we talked about last week about the first half of the fundamentals. We talked about the 1% rule, which is that if you get 1% better every day, you become 37 times better by the end of the year. And the math behind all this is that 1.01 to the power of 365 equals 37. 0.01 stands for 1%, and 365 stands for 365 days in a year. And the reason why it's power is because consistency compounds. If you stay consistent with a habit, it leads to exponential results. And so that's what he talked about in the first half. He also explained how people tend to give up when starting out a new habit because you tend not to get results right away. He explains that growth is never linear, but is exponential. It compounds over a certain period of time. And so we simply have to wait until the results come, because when they come, they're going to come in abundance, right? And so now we're on to the second half. So he proceeds to explain that goals aren't necessarily good to have, and that we should focus on habits, focus on systems instead. And now, let me tell you guys that I don't completely agree with this when I read the book. And that's because I think that goals are good to have. You know, we talk about goals all the time. Like, what's your goal for the New Year's? You need to give yourself goals, this, and that. And so why is James Clear saying that we don't need goals? Well, he gives 4 main reasons why goals are not good to have. And let me tell you what they are. Number 1, he says that winners and losers have the same goals. And what he means by this is that a rich person and a poor person have the same goal of being rich. Only one of them is rich. Why? Well, because they focus on habits and systems. You know, we can have goals, but it doesn't mean we'll have the habits and systems in place. You know, James Clear explains that you never rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems every single time. Number 2, he says that achieving a goal is only a momentary change. And when I first read this, I was a little bit confused because what does it mean by that? But it makes sense. Let's say my room is dirty, and so I finally muster up enough motivation and energy to go and clean that room. And so the room is clean now, but what's gonna happen 2 weeks from now if I keep up those same unorganized habits that got me that room dirty in the first place? I'm going to have to muster up that energy and that motivation again, and chances are I won't want to. So if we simply had good habits, had good systems in place, we would never have to go and muster up that motivation, that energy. It would always be clean. And you might say that being an organized person requires you to be requires you to have motivation and energy, but that is not the case because habits are automated. Okay? If we simply keep doing something for a certain period of time, it will become an automatic process. For example, me, I gave myself the habit of making my bed every morning. And so at first it was a little bit of a hassle, but the more I did it, the more it became a habit, and the more I did it without requiring motivation or energy. You know, I just get my 2 feet out of bed and I start grabbing the covers to make it look nice. And so now it's like, no matter how tired I am, no matter how much sleep I had, that bed will be made, and it just takes 2 minutes. I mean, I don't really think about it. And so the third reason, he explains that goals restrict your happiness. Now, what does he mean by that? I was a little bit confused when he said this at first, but it makes sense as well. So he explains that, well, let me give you an example. Let's say you give yourself the goal of attaining $10,000 by the end of the year. What's going to happen if you don't achieve that goal? Are you going to see yourself as a disappointment, as a failure? Chances are you will. You won't be too confident in yourself when you don't achieve those goals. What if you fell short of $100? So you got, $9,900, which is still really good, but you didn't achieve that goal, and so you're still unhappy, although you had really good habits that got you $9,900 in the first place. You should be proud of yourself. And that's why he explains that goals aren't necessarily good to have. And so, yeah, me personally, I think that if something can be measured, it can be achieved. And for something to be measured, we need a goal in place, right? Let's say I give myself the goal of writing 100 tweets in 10 days. Well, now I can measure this because then I can tell myself, oh, well, that means you need to write 10 tweets every day in order to reach this goal. I think goals are good because you can do that. So, oh, sorry guys, my phone is ringing. Here, hold on, give me a second. Sorry guys, my bone specialist called me because I have surgery soon. But yeah, right back to it, okay? So that is all. I think as long as you're not too hard on yourself when you give yourself goals, they're not a bad thing to do. They're not a bad thing to have. And so that is all for the first section of this book. Now, coming up after the music break, we'll be talking about part 1 of the section behind habits, and which is the Q. Don't forget that you can follow us on social media at DCSA Media Hub. We're going to play you some music. Here's Ventura Highway by America live from the Media Hub on riotradio.ca. Yo guys, welcome back to QTalks. I'm your host, Quentin Jean Terrade, and today we're going to talk about the Q. The Q in which QTalks is going to talk about because it is the next in Q for the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. Tiny changes, remarkable results. Guys, if you weren't there for the last segment, I was talking about easy and proven ways to build good habits and break bad ones, but more specifically, we got through the first section of the book. So now we're on to the Q, which is the first part of the science behind habits. So let's get into that, okay? For this section, we're going to do it chapter by chapter, just because then I feel you guys have a better idea of how the book is outlined and make sure we don't miss anything, okay? So chapter 4 is called The Man Who Didn't Look Right. When I first read this, I was a little bit confused because what does he mean by that? What does he say, the man who didn't look right? We're talking about habits here, but I read it and it makes sense. So let me explain to you guys what this chapter is about. It says that a lot of the habits that we do on a day-to-day basis are done unconsciously. Or more specifically, we need to be conscious of the cues that spark bad habits because we're not conscious of the cues that spark them. Now, the cues or the cue is the initial signal that is sent to your brain when starting on a habit. That is the initial signal that's sent to your brain to make you to act on a habit. And so that's what this section talks about. And now, we need to understand this. We underestimate how much our brains and bodies can do without thinking. You do not tell your hair to grow, your heart to pump, your lungs to breathe, or your stomach to digest. And yet, your body handles all this and more on autopilot. You are much more than your conscious self. And this is one of the most surprising insights about our habits. You don't need to be aware of the cues for a habit to begin. You can notice an opportunity and take action without dedicating conscious attention to it. This is what makes habits useful. And now it does make habits useful, but it can also be a burden because we are not conscious of the bad cues that spark bad habits. For example, the phone in your pocket causes you to go on your phone. The cookies on the counter makes you eat the cookies. Or the TV remote on your couch makes you watch the TV. We are not conscious of these things that make us do these bad habits. But if they weren't there to begin with, we wouldn't be doing these bad habits. And so, how can we become conscious of these bad cues? Well, James Clear came up with a solution called the Habits Scorecard. I have a video of this if you guys could play it up. Alright, so here we have the Habits Scorecard, which is an easy and proven way to make the unconscious conscious, okay? So let me explain what you're looking at. Here we have a list of our daily habits, and here you're going to tell me whether your habits are positive, negative, or neutral. Now ask yourself, when filling out this list, are these habits bringing you closer or further from your desired identity? Let's say I'm a guy who's trying to go in a bulk, well then eating 3,000 calories a day would be a positive thing to do. But if I'm trying to go on a cut, that would be a negative thing to do. So for this list right here, let's say I'm a guy who wants to be a successful entrepreneur. Well, I start out by waking up. That is a neutral thing to do. Everybody wakes up, you're not special. Then you go on your phone. That is a negative thing to do. Why are you going on your phone when you're trying to be a successful entrepreneur? Especially after you wake up, right? You got better things to do at that time. Then you make your bed. Well, successful entrepreneurs are organized people. And so making your bed is an organized thing to do. That is a vote towards your desired identity, right? Positive. Then you go to the bathroom. Everybody goes to the bathroom. Everybody needs to go to the bathroom. That is neutral. Brush your teeth. Good hygiene. Positive. Deodorant again. Positive. Good hygiene. Watching TV. Why do you need to watch TV when you're trying to become a successful entrepreneur? You need action. Negative. And so you're going to list this out for every habit that you have throughout the day. But don't worry. You don't need to illustrate it like I did. You simply have to print it out on atomichabits.com/scorecard. Alright guys, so I just wanted to tell you guys really quick that watching TV is okay to do. I was just saying that to become a little bit more extreme, but even me, I watch TV all the time. That's okay, nothing wrong with doing it. I actually just watched The Last Dance, which talked about the final year of the Chicago Bulls in the Michael Jordan's era. It was a really good show, and it actually taught me a lot about, just motivation, mindset, and all of that stuff, right? So watching TV, nothing wrong with that, as long as we don't let it affect our habits, our good habits, okay? So now we're going to move on to chapter 5, which is the second chapter of this section. And this one is called, let me get to it really quick, the best way to start a new habit. And so you might be wondering, QTalks, what is the best way to start a new habit? Well, me having read the book, I'll tell you what it is. So, James Clear explains that the two most common cues are time and location. And so, these two things are what makes you aware of doing a habit. And so, the goal here is to implement a technique that correlates time and location with a new habit that you want to do. And so, how can we do this? Well, I'll tell it to you guys through a story in the book. In 2001, researchers in Great Britain began working with 248 people to build better exercise habits over the course of 2 weeks. The subjects were divided into 3 groups. The first group was called the control group. They were simply asked to track how often they exercised. Now the second group was called the motivation group. They were asked not only to track their they were asked not only to track their workouts, but also to read some material on the benefits of exercise. The researchers also explained to the group how exercise could reduce the risk of coronary heart disease and improve heart health. Finally, there was the third group. These subjects received the same presentation as the second group, which ensured that they had equal levels of motivation. However, they were also asked to formulate a plan for when and where they would exercise over the following week. Now, when and where, that is time and location, right? Specifically, each member of the third group completed the following sentence. During the next week, I will partake in at least 20 minutes of vigorous exercise on this day, at this time, in this place. Day and time is location. Day and time, that's time. And location is a location, right? So they set that up for them. What were the results of this experiment? Now, let me tell you guys that when I was reading this and I had to guess what the results were, I thought that the first group wouldn't really work out because they were just asked to do it, nothing else. And so people don't like to be told something that they don't want to do. Number two, I thought they would do much better because they were given a motivational speech and they were given also the facts about the benefits of working out and the risks that not working out can have. And the third group, well, they were simply asked to put down a time and a location for when to do it. They were also given the motivational speech, so I thought 2 and 3 would do about the same. And I thought the second group would just find a time and a place to do it. I mean, they know their own schedule, right? They're adults, they can find their own time to do it. But what were the results of this experiment? Well, in the first and second groups, 35 to 38% of people exercised at least once per week. Interestingly, the motivational presentation given to the second group seemed to have no meaningful impact on behavior. But guess what? 91% of the third group exercised at least once per week, which is more than double the normal rate. So from this experiment, what does that tell us? It explains that having a time and a location for when to do a new habit doubles our chances of us doing the habit. And so I think we can all learn from that and learn to use this. For example, I want to start reading. Well, why not give yourself a time and a place for when to do it? After breakfast at 7:30 a.m., I will read for 20 minutes. If you have a time and a location for when to do it, that will double your chances. So, yeah, that's it for Chapter 5. Let's move on to Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is called Motivation is Overrated, Environment Often Matters More. It said here that motivation was overrated. And after having read this, it makes sense because let's think back to the second group. They were given a motivational speech, but they still did much worse than the third group who set up time and location. And so there's time, there's location, and then there's environment. So environment plays a big part in the formation of habits. Let me explain that to you guys, right? And so here it explains that the human body has about 11 million sensory receptors. Approximately 10 million of those are dedicated to sight. Some experts estimate that half of the brain's resources are used on vision. Given that we are more dependent on vision than any other sense, it should come as no surprise that visual cues are the greatest catalyst of our behavior. For this reason, a small change in what you see can lead to a big shift in what you do. As a result, you can imagine how important it is to live and work in environments that are filled with productive cues and devoid of unproductive ones. So here it basically explains that if you want to develop a habit, then you need to put yourself in an environment where the normal behavior is your desired behavior. Because it explains that a person who appears to have tremendous self-control is not more disciplined than you because they have motivation or willpower. They simply put themselves in less tempting situations and less tempting environments. If I want to stop drinking alcohol, I'm not going to go to the bar every weekend. If I want to stop smoking marijuana, I'm not going to put myself around friends who smoke marijuana. If I want to stop going to McDonald's, I'm going to stop taking the road that takes me by a McDonald's on my way to work. That road is about environment. That bar is about environment. Those friends are about environment. And so, same thing for good habits. If you want to start doing something new, then put yourself in an environment where people do this new thing. That's why people go to book clubs. That's why people go to the gym instead of working out at home, because people are doing the same thing as them. People want to belong to the tribe, and it talks more about that in the third section of this book. So, coming up after the music break, we'll be talking about part 2 of the science behind habits, which is the craving. Don't forget that you can follow us on social media at DCSA Media Hub. We're going to play you some music. Here's Strangers in the Night by Frank Sinatra, live from the Media Hub on riotradio.ca. Alright guys, so now, welcome back to QTalks. I'm your host, Content Terad, and now we're going to talk about part 2 of the science behind habits, which is the craving. Now, understand that this section is all about making desired habits seem appealing and making undesired habits seem unappealing. And so, how do we do this? Well, there are many ways to do it, and we'll go through all of them through each chapter of this section. So chapter 8 is called Making a Habit Seem Irresistible. And so for this, I'll give you guys some context. We have to understand that habits are a dopamine-driven feedback loop, but not the habit itself. It is the thought of doing the habit that gives us that spike in dopamine. For example, and this might be a little bit explicit, but a cocaine addict gets a spike in dopamine when he sees the white powder, not when he is high on the powder, on the cocaine. Or children get a spike in dopamine when they see the presents under the Christmas tree, not when they are playing with the gifts that they got. Or adults get a spike in dopamine when they think about their upcoming vacation, not when they are on the vacation itself. And so for this, that means that we have to think about the habits that we need to do in a good light. We need to make it so that we get a spike in dopamine when thinking of these habits. And so James Clear has a solution for this called temptation bundling. And that is when we link something that we need to do with something that we want to do. And so he gives an example of this, which is the story of Ronan Byrne. I don't even need the book for this one. I remember it in my head, so let's get straight to it. So Ronan Byrne is an electrical engineering student in Ireland. And so for him, there was something that he really wanted to do, something that he loved, and that was to watch Netflix. You know, when he thought about watching Netflix, that gave him a spike in dopamine. But there was also something that he needed to do, and that was to start riding his stationary bike. You know, my guess would be that he got pretty unhealthy watching Netflix all the time, and so he had to start riding his bikes. He needed some exercise. That was something that he needed to do. And so, putting his engineering skills to use, he used temptation bundling. And so he made it so that every time he rode or he pedaled at a certain speed, there would be Netflix playing in front of the screen, that like on the screen that was in front of the stationary bike. And so now when he thought about needing to ride a stationary bike, he thought about watching Netflix. And so every time he thought about doing it, he got a spike in dopamine. That is a great example of temptation bundling. Another good example of this that I used myself was listening to music every time I was going to the gym, but only listening to music when I was at the gym. Because listening to music is something that you want to do. We all love listening to music, right? When we think about how we're going to get to listen to music, that gives us a spike in dopamine. But the gym, that's not always the case. That's something that we need to do, not always something that we want to do. And so I made it so that every single time I went to the gym, I would play music, but that's the only time I play music. And so now I'm linking something that I need to do, which is to go to the gym, with something that I want to do, which is to listen to music. Another great example would be only drinking coffee when you are reading in the morning. Let's say you want to give yourself the habit of reading. That's something you need to do, or you tell yourself you need to do it. But it's not always something we want to do. When we think about reading, we're like, oh, that's kind of boring. But you need to do it. How are we going to see that in a positive light? Only drink coffee when you are reading, because I know when you wake up and you think about drinking coffee, that gives you a spike in dopamine, right? I mean, for me, it does. I love coffee, and I'm sure many of us do as well. Whether that's tea, that's coffee, or anything you like to eat or drink, link that with something that you need to do. Okay, now we're on to chapter number 9, which is called The Role of Family and Friends in Shaping Your Habits. And that really is what it is, because understand this: your friends have a big impact on your habits, and so does your family. You know, James Clear explains that, and let me get to this page. He explains that, sorry guys, I can't even find the page here. Okay. He explains that we want to fit in and to bond with others. As humans, that is what we want to do. He explains that in the past, or even in the present, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. In the long history of humankind, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. As a result, one of the deepest human desires is to belong, and this ancient preference exerts a powerful influence on our modern behavior. We don't choose our earliest habits, we imitate them. And that really does correlate to last section, which talked about environment, because like then, or like over there, like I explained back then, we need to put ourselves in environments where the normal behavior is the desired behavior. Okay? It also had an interesting study. So this one groundbreaking study tracked 12,000 people for 32 years and found that a person's chances of becoming obese increased by 57% if he or she had a friend who became obese. And it works the other way too. Another study found that if one person in a relationship lost weight, the other partner would also slim down about 1/3 of the time. Our friends and family provide a sort of invisible peer pressure that pulls us in their direction. And I do find that to be true because, as you guys may know, I do like to read books. And I found that when I started reading books, my brother started to read books as well. My mom started to read books again. My friends told me that they started reading books because I was talking about books all the time. And so you tend to have a good influence on people. And it is the same thing as well for the opposite. You know, if someone does something bad, someone close to you starts doing something bad, you're more likely to be doing it with them too. And oftentimes we just take the good and leave the bad. But if they are doing a lot of bad, we tend to take a little bit of that bad, right? It's like they say, you become the average of your 5 closest friends. And so you need to surround yourself with people whose normal behavior is your desired behavior. Okay, now we're moving on to chapter number 10, which is called How to Find and Fix the Causes of Your Bad Habits. And so, how is it that we do that? Well, I need a little bit of context for this one, or I need to give you guys a little bit of context for this one. And it explains that people solve the same underlying issue in different ways. You know, one person might learn to reduce stress by going on a walk, while someone else might learn to reduce stress by smoking a cigarette. And why is that? Because it's the same solution, because there are two different ways to do it. And so why does someone pick the bad one and someone picks the good one? Well, the reason for this is because the brain is predictive and not reactive. The brain looks at what it did last time to solve that issue of stress. And the person who smoked a cigarette because last time they smoked a cigarette, their stress was reduced. Same thing for the person who went on a walk. And so, knowing this, we need to learn to reprogram our brain to enjoy hard habits. It's like I explained, we need to look or think about the habit in a positive light. And so, how do we do this? Well, okay. I did want to give one quick study before I talked about that. And it talked about how, you know what? I won't even talk about it. I think I'm short on time here. So the solution here is to correlate hard habits with enjoyable experiences. And for this, we simply need to change one word in our vocabulary when thinking about something. Instead of saying have, you say get. For example, when I think about the things that I need to do tomorrow, I tend to say, tomorrow I have to wake up at this time to go to school. Tomorrow I have to walk the dog when I get home. Tomorrow I have to cook breakfast for the family. And so when we say have, we tend to think of these things as nuisances, but it doesn't have to be a nuisance. It can be an opportunity if we simply change one word in the sentence. Instead of saying have, you say get. You say, I get to wake up early tomorrow morning. I get to walk the dog after I'm back home from school. I get to cook breakfast for the family. Because it really is all a matter of perspective, People would be more than happy to do what you're able to do. They would be more than happy to do what you get to do. And so, yeah, I thought that was a really good example on how we could use these to think about habits in a positive light. He explains, or James Clear explains, that the key to finding and fixing the causes of your bad habits is to reframe the associations you have about them. It's not easy, but if you can reprogram your predictions, you can transform a hard habit into an attractive one. And so, yeah, guys, that's the end of this episode. I look forward to seeing you guys back here next week, where we'll talk about sections number 4 and number 5, which is the two last sciences behind habits, the action and the reward. So don't forget that you can follow the Media Hub on social media at DCSA Media Hub. You can also follow us at QTalks. Here's That's Live by Frank Sinatra, playing us out live from the Media Hub on riotradio.ca.